I always have spent a lot of time daydreaming, for a better lack of a better word. And I'd say that one of my challenges has been to not get too lost in the world of vision and 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 sort of daydreaming, and sort of I spent a lot of time imagining what the ideal is and how it could be better, and more so than most people. And I think that the challenge for me has been to reconcile that with um, taking action in the moment. Not that I've been lazy or procrastinated, but more so that like I've always had a propensity to get caught up in some like figuring out some minute detail of my vision where that doesn't actually matter, and just being like, just focus on this, now what's in front of you. So I'd say that's definitely part. Innocence, I think, is an interesting one, because I think that it does take a sort of innocence to being a creative person. Is a lot about I would put innocence and naivete and sort of the and what's the other word, like being genuine in your sort of exploration into what you don't know. And I think that that sort of has an innocence about it. So I think that that's a big part of who I am. Yeah.
You're listening to the Mission Makers Show, a podcast that inspires humans to get into the mindset of success. My name's Farah Nanji, and I'm the founder of a business in the motorsports industry that explores leadership lessons from things like Formula One. I'm also a DJ and music producer in the underground electronic scene, and a public speaker on key topics like resilience, building high-performance teams, overcoming learning difficulties, and stimulating creativity. And to tie it all together, I love writing thought-provoking content as a journalist for these industries which are so unique in themselves. On this show, I'm sitting down with some of the most inspiring and driven people I've met around the world to talk about their processes, their failures, the lessons they've learned, and how they are truly making an impact for this world. So guys, it is the final episode of season 2. I can't believe it. Where did the time go? It's been just such an incredible and unbelievable season, to be honest, starting off with Carl Cox and then featuring so many amazing stories from entrepreneurs, race car drivers, musicians and change makers all around the world, to today where I'm just so beyond excited to share that I got to sit down with my all-time favourite band and Grammy award-winning artist for the last decade, Bob Moses. With nearly 2 million listeners a month, the blend that Bob Moses strike between underground electronic music and melancholic vocals is just achingly beautiful and just so deep. I think they did what so many couldn't in the music industry, and they've done it super well. Born and bred in Brooklyn, but with roots in Canada, this electronic duo have got an amazing story to share. They're joining us from LA today, where they're camped out at the moment, and we're going to go very deep in this interview. So just before we begin, guys, I wanted to share some really, really special news. And to be honest, it was really quite unbelievable. Mission Makers recently entered the top 2% of podcasts in the world. So I want to say a huge thank you to all of you who've been tuning in, sharing the show with your friends and subscribing. And also to my amazing team who've gone above and beyond with me since day one. It's really quite incredible to close the season on such a high, and it does set the bar like super high for season 3, which we're going to be kicking off after summer. But fear not, because we're going to have some of our best bits being aired over the break with some great bonus content, including how you can start your own podcast. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to stay tuned into the show and you love the content that we're making here at Mission Makers. Also, if you're interested in some really cool rewards like virtual DJ lessons with me, signed books from our guests, and exclusive merchandise, head over to www.patreon.com/Mission Makers to check out how you can access these exclusive rewards and support Mission Makers. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I'm so excited to have you guys on. Like, I've been telling everyone, like, you guys have been my favorite band for literally since for a long time, more than 5 to 6 years. So it's a huge honor to have you guys join us today on Mission Makers, and can't wait to kind of just get straight in. So I want to start it off by sort of taking it back to the beginning. Unsurprisingly, you're both super musically inclined as children. One of you comes from a very musical family, while the other comes from a bit more of an academically driven background. So starting with you, Tom, I know that you almost gave up and you moved back to, you were almost going to move back to Vancouver. So how much of your determination came down to being able to read those signs early on and being determined not to let go of your innate gifts?
Um, I think that's a good question. Starting off with a bang. I think the academic nature of my family, I always felt a lot of pressure to do something that was valuable in the eye in that sort of frame of mind, you know. Um, but really, the thing that I wasn't sure, I was sort of going back to Vancouver to regroup. I was living in New York and I had kind of run out of money. Um, so and then I met with Jimmy, and there was sort of like this week of there was this like week long period where we did a few studio sessions, and it was just kind of like obvious to me that there was something special there, and that it was a big opportunity that I needed to pursue. And it was a pretty easy decision to sort of adjust plans and make plans to stay and continue working. So I think, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to sort of say what determination is in hindsight. But I was always just super determined, and I think I was going through a sort of period of weakness, or a period of not really knowing what the future held, and sort of being a bit weighed down by that. But I viewed the serendipity of meeting up with Jimmy and having this sort of intense moment as sort of like the universe saying, "Here you go. You should do this. It's not. You shouldn't like change your mindset because there's still something to explore here." So that was kind of all I needed. And so, you know, I think when you get, it takes a lot of determination, but when you get beat down to a level where you are really questioning what you want and whether you're on the right path, I think in my case, I was sort of, you know, the universe. I don't want to sound too like hippie dip saying the universe showed me the way, but like that's kind of what happened. You know, like I mean, I had a circumstance that fell into my lap right in the nick of time, or right in the right time, that kind of gave me an obvious path forward towards what I really wanted, and I at least had the guts left to take it, you know.
Definitely. When you send the energy out, it always manifests. And how about you, Jimmy? Did coming from such a legendary musical family act as a double-edged sword in any way?
I mean, not not really. I think it's definitely been more of a blessing than a curse. Like, I'm fortunate enough that, like, what my parents did, and my dad especially. He was very behind the scenes, so he's not. It's not like he's famous. He wrote a lot of big songs, but I never sort of felt like living under this shadow of this inescapable, person in the music business. But I think what it did teach me is that the dream is very much possible. Like, growing up with a family that were both musicians, both in bands, both writing songs and successful at it. It's something that seems so unattainable, like, especially when you're watching people on TV or listening to records. It's like, how am I ever going to do this? And it just normalized the whole thing for me and made me feel like it was a very viable, like, sort of career path. And not only that, um, it really inspired like a work ethic, because I saw how difficult, like, if it was something that I loved and was really going to do, you really have to do it because you love it. And so it just kind of, presented a path of like, this is what it's going to take if you really want to do it, but it's something that's very possible if you just try really hard. So I think for that, it's been such a fantastic thing to grow up around.
Yeah, definitely, and especially like pre-internet days to have that guide. Now it's a lot easier to figure out the path towards becoming a DJ or a musician, and the knowledge is really out there. But definitely back in the day, that wasn't there. For my second question, I always like to go into the meaning of our guest names because I'm always curious if it ends up matching who they become. And it was really interesting to find out that the name Tom means twin, innocence, a visionary. Do you feel that this encapsulates the essence of who you are individually, Tom?
Um, that's a very interesting question. Uh, I'd say the visionary part. I spend a lot of time. I always have spent a lot of time daydreaming, for a better lack of a better word. And I'd say that one of my challenges has been to not get too lost in the world of vision and 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 sort of daydreaming, and sort of I spent a lot of time imagining what the ideal is and how it could be better, and more so than most people. And I think that the challenge for me has been to reconcile that with taking action in the moment. Not that I've been lazy or procrastinated, but more so that like I've always had a propensity to get caught up in some like figuring out some minute detail of my vision where that doesn't actually matter, and just being like, just focus on this, now what's in front of you. So I'd say that's definitely part. Innocence, I think, is an interesting one, because I think that it does take a sort of innocence to being a creative person. Is a lot about I would put innocence and naivete and sort of the and what's the other word, like being genuine in your sort of exploration into what you don't know. And I think that that sort of has an innocence about it. So I think that that's a big part of who I am. Yeah. And then twin is confusing because I'm an only, I don't know, it's weird. I'm an only child from my mom, but I have half brothers and half sisters, and I'm in a band with Jimmy, who's like could be my twin, I guess, in some ways. So I guess there's things to relate to there. It's interesting. I didn't know any of
Maybe.
that stuff. So
Oh, interesting. Well, maybe he's your musical soulmate in that sense.
yeah, there you go. There you go.
And then Jimmy. So Jimmy means. Do you know what your name means, Jimmy? Actually,
I
before
have
I
no
say.
idea.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
This question always stumps people. It's really interesting. Okay. So Jimmy means son of the spirit, a supplanter, which means to follow in the footsteps, and benevolence. So how do you feel about that?
I feel that actually that pretty much sums me up. I mean, I feel like I'm really following in the footsteps of sort of the path that's been laid out for me. And like, I'm son of the spirit. I mean, I'm just gonna take that to as a that I'm quite. I mean, I'm looking at that as I'm quite chipper. I don't know if it means I'm looking at that as the son of the. I mean, it's quite deep. It's funny. Like both of us have never like bothered to look up like what our names mean. And I just find that quite interesting. It's like a question that's never been put to me until now. But I think it's interesting because Jimmy's also derived from James, right? Jimmy's really just a nickname. So did those meanings still apply to James?
Yeah. So Jimmy was very much supplanter, following in the footsteps, and then James was kind of son of the spirit and benevolence. It was a bit of an amalgamation of both.
Wow, I
I mean,
didn't know that.
you're like, Jimmy's one of the kindest people, like genuinely kind people there is. So I think that makes sense from my perspective, anyways.
I appreciate that.
Well, to kind of round it up, I also looked up what does Robert or Bob Moses mean in both those words, and this might surprise you because it means bright fame. And then it was almost like, well, then it's a destiny that you guys are pursuing something as a duo together that would become incredibly unique in its approach, which is kind of what you've become known for synonymously in dance music. So yeah, really, really interesting.
Really interesting. Well, there you go. We should have just like looked up what our names meant, and then we could have just like known the future,
Well, it sometimes has a very subconscious role, even when you don't know what it means, it kind of like you become sometimes the embodiment of that essence. And I don't think many names have a bad meaning to them, so it can never be a bad thing, hopefully.
Yeah.
So the story of how you two met is infamous at this point, and I'm just curious to know, like, have you guys thought about what you would have done today if you hadn't met in that parking lot in Brooklyn?
I try not to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's not something that I really thought about, but I've sort of had questions to myself of like, if music hadn't quite worked out, sort of what have I done? Which is, I guess, a similarly linked question, like an alternate reality. And I feel I feel like I can speak for both of us here, sort of, that I know that Tom, like he's talking about determination later, that like whatever it was that we wanted to do, I feel like we would have just found a way to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, um, I think that Tom and I are very lucky that we found each other. And but I know that, Tom is one of the most talented people that I know, that if he hadn't met me, he would have figured out a way to do it. There's just, some people just have a predisposition to just want to like grind, keep going, and I think, like Tom said, he's a dreamer. And I think that having that, aspiring to something, that and setting goals and trying to make it attainable, but like step by step, not getting lost in the dream, but just being like, okay, here's the goalpost, let's get that and go to the next one. I think we would have just applied that logic and hopefully, knock on wood, have had success doing what we love to do regardless.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It's always good to kind of put the end as the goal map and then work your way backwards in this crazy thing called dance music. So, Tom, I know actually, similar to me, part of your musical development took place at Berklee College of Music in Boston. And I tried to find out what you studied, but I couldn't find that information online. So I have to ask, what did you study and what was that like for you? What were the main things that you learned from Berklee?
I only went for 1 year, and I studied guitar was my principal instrument, and songwriting was my whatever that is, subject matter of, because I only went for 1 year, I didn't really, like, you start the first semester, you kind of do your basic courses, and then the second semester you get into some beginnings of what your major is, I guess. And so the best course that I had there was a lyric writing course with Henry Gaffney, who is now passed on. But he was a big songwriter. He wrote like a lot of the music for Fame and a bunch of other big songs back in the day. And he was just a really interesting character. And I learned a lot from him, in a short time, but like a few very important things about just about how to approach stuff. For me, honestly, the biggest thing I would say, other than the fact that Berklee was a great experience, and it sort of reconciled the need to the academic part of my family to sort of like do good by that. It combined academia, because it's a college, with music, which is what I wanted to do, and sort of legitimized it for a second. And also it made me feel like I'd always been super sort of felt like I wasn't good enough for like the real musicians. Like I was never like a shredder guitar player or like a virtuoso anything, and so I had a lot of fears around being good enough for music school, and when I went there I was like, oh, I'm like, I can hang with these people, and like I'm quite good at it, and so it was very legitimizing for me in a big way. It just, in terms of like self-confidence, that I had sort of whatever that was, or whatever I perceived that to be. So it was really great. It was also really good to like, go to a new country and be away from, in a totally new city. And that was really beneficial. And like, I hit the ground running. I got a band of sort of friends that I made really quick, and just started doing gigs, as many as I could. And, would drive around the Northeast playing as shows and hustling and stuff. So it was a great experience. And it was definitely a precursor to me moving to New York. I don't think I would have really, like, because I went to play in New York a few times while at Berklee, and I don't think that I would have, well, maybe I would have, but I don't know if I would have had a way into New York, just like, oh, I'm just going to go to New York. But maybe I would have, I don't know. So anyways, it was a really great year, and I remember it fondly. And I probably learned more things than I actually can like say,
Yeah, no, of course. So what was the main reason that you decided to leave after a year?
Well, I had some partial scholarship, and I, but even so, it was like comparably to, my dad was a professor at UBC, which is a university in Vancouver, and so I could go there for free. And so compared to free, even, reduced tuition and all that stuff at Berkeley was still really expensive. And so that weighed on me. I also felt as though, I sort of felt guilty about taking, and my family couldn't really afford even that. Like they couldn't afford even partial tuition. And so I felt guilty about that. And also I just, when I was there and as I got into the year, I realized like, okay, what I really want to do, I think I'm better to just go do it. Like I think that I've got this, I think this experience checked a bunch of boxes for me and made me realize that like I can I can do what I'm worried that I can't do. And I think the best use of my time, as opposed to like hanging around and learning more here, is just to go do it,
Mm,
And that was
yeah.
just sort of an intuition that I just followed. And it conveniently tied into the whole like, I feel guilty about forcing my family to like try and figure out how to pay for this, or like taking on student debt or something.
Yeah, it's incredibly expensive to study in the States.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to go there more as a for summer school. I studied video game audio and film scoring, which I wanted to
Cool.
tie back like some sort of sonic inspiration to my productions. And I only dreamed that I could go there longer. But when you become an artist, then it's quite tough to make time to spend 3 years doing that. It's quite a huge time commitment, but really interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us. I'm interested to know, it's quite tricky to find the right balance between the underground scene and the mainstream. And I know that both of you guys are huge lovers of techno and the underground. How have you kind of found it balancing both of those worlds?
That it's something that kind of happens naturally. Like we both just love a lot of music. Like we love, and I think it's that because when we were starting out, there was such an amazing scene in Brooklyn happening. Like that was, and the cool thing about the scene that was happening in Brooklyn, or that I should say that was happening in underground dance music at the time in like sort of 2010, 2011, was that the people that were listening to house and techno they'd also listen to the Strokes, and they'd also listen to Oasis, or they'd also listen to Nine Inch Nails, or they'd also like it wasn't just this homogenous thing where people were only listening to one kind of music and everything was sounding the same. So it felt very much like, okay, I can go see a Vampire Weekend concert, and then at 1 a.m. I'm going to go with my friends to this nightclub, or I'm going to go to this warehouse rave in Brooklyn. And so for us, being inspired by sort of the dance beats that DJs were playing and then sort of writing songs over top of it, we were really nervous and apprehensive about that at first, because we knew that dance music was very dominated by instrumental music, and it's sort of a faux pas in some senses to add vocals on top of that. But at the same time, there was also a lot of people that felt like us, that loved songs and also loved underground dance culture. And so we were just trying to marry the two. And it was just like sort of a lot of experiment and a lot of trial and error. And we had a lot more successes than sort of errors when we were like, coming up with ideas. Like I remember like, we thought it either was going to work or it wasn't going to work when the first couple times Tom went in and the first live show Bob Moses actually played, or that Tom sang at, I was not involved in. I was just like a crowd member.
No way.
We had written some songs, or written some vocal hooks on top of tracks that this act, Frank and Tony, who were on the independent record label Sister and Thread, that initially signed us. And they asked Tom to come do a gig with them at the Marcy Hotel in Brooklyn. And so he sang the songs that we had wrote with them. And, it was a great night, but when Tom got up there on the mic, the place went nuts. No one had really even heard these songs before. And so I was in the crowd going like, this is awesome. Like we should and at that point we were undecided about how we were going to perform, what kind of music we were going to make. And I remember we were walking back to our apartment that morning while the sun was coming up, and we sort of had this epiphany, like we should just do this, like make underground dance music with songs and perform like this and let's see what happens, you know? So, I mean, that was a long way to answer your question in the sense that like, it's been something we've been conscious of, but it's also happened quite naturally. And we've learned not to get in the way of like overthinking the balance between underground music and sort of what we do and where it all fits, you know?
Yeah, that was a really cool moment, that walk home, because like the sun was just coming up and we were like, man, we're onto something here, you know? That was a cool time. I think that what Jimmy said is totally really accurate and great. And it's like back to that idea of what you like when you asked about the determination to stay. We've really tried to like, there's this like interplay between what we want and like what sort of is coming at us, you know? And so that was when that experience happened, at that point, like Jimmy said, we were very much, we had written, you know, we had done these songs with Frank and Tony, and we had done a few other songs that were more bandy, like typical indie, and we had produced a bunch of music and written a bunch of stuff, and it was kind of all over the place. And we were sort of like, what do we do? Where do we go? How do we sort of, we've been working for several months making music. How do we sort of like put our face out to the world now? What do we call ourselves? How do we start playing gigs and all this stuff? And this was sort of that just happened. Like we didn't have any control. We got asked by Frank and Tony to come do it. And there was this reaction that was like, whoa, you know? And we were both, I remember like the room we were playing in was tiny. There was maybe like 100 people like crammed, you know? And I remember it going nuts, and like everybody pulled their phones out and shit. And we were like, and I just remember looking over at Jimmy and being like, what's happening, you know? And then and so that was just sort of like a sign that like, maybe this is what we should start with. Yeah.
Really interesting. And so like when you're writing songs now, is a lot of that already like in your head, or does it kind of transpire when you're playing around with the software? And then also in conjunction with that, what comes first? Is it the vocal, the beat, the melody, or is each process in a song very unique to each song?
Each process is super unique, but I think sort of like we were discussing this recently, like one of the typical ways that we sort of write is like we'll come up with the instrumental first, you know, and sort of have something that sounds sort of catchy and is a like, you know, for lack of a better word, a beat or the semblance of a song, and then we'll try and come up with vocal hooks. We'll throw the microphone up and Tom will start singing vocal hooks or coming up with ideas, and we'll sort of bounce back and forth on that. And then we've done this thing for a while. It doesn't always happen like this, but like a lot of our ideas, it's like the initial, that vocal melody and that beat or whatever it is has to sort of be catchy or enticing enough for us to sort of go through the pains of trying to write lyrics to it, because writing lyrics is such a, it's painful, not in the sense of that it's hard work, but it is hard work, but that also that it's like, it's quite a cathartic process for us. Like you have a limited window to say something, and it's like, you know, you're trying to do rhyming schemes, and it's very difficult. So you just want to make sure that if you're going to set off down that path, you kind of want to make sure all your ducks are lined up. But on the flip side, sometimes a song just sort of pours out of you, and like Tom will come with an idea that he just come up with an acoustic guitar, and then we'll try and produce that, you know? So it happens a number of different ways, but that's been one of the ones that has sort of, I guess, yielded sort of the most success for us.
Yeah, I think all that I'll add to that is like, I think that a lot of we both have tons of ideas. Like we're both very I guess prolific is the word. Like we both write a lot of stuff and come up with new ideas often, but the ones that really survive and like we coalesce around are, they have to have the balance of both really good song aspects and really cool production. So they have, like, sometimes we'll have a really good song, but we just can't figure out the production, you know, and that one just dies and sits in the vault. Or sometimes we'll have a really cool beat, like a cool loop, and we just can't really get any really interesting song ideas, or vocal parts, or kind of whatever, or like it doesn't really work, or there's not enough room. Like the beat's cool, but there's not enough room in there to like, or we can't figure out how to fit melody in, you know? And so that kind of just sits in the vault. And so, but the ones that have success are the right balance of like, this is a really cool loop, it's like usually like a 16 bar loop, and then that's enough to like come up with some cool parts, and then we get a few cool vocal parts, and then we sort of arrange and then produce the rest of it, and like produce the parts that add dynamic and add other riffs and make it sound better, and you know what I mean, and then lyrics always come last.
Really interesting. Well, like when you're kind of in that situation where you've got one part which is like amazing and then you can't find the right balance for the other one, does it ever come to your mind to think about maybe releasing under different aliases so that that song can have its own identity and live in the sphere? Or
I haven't personally thought of that yet. That just feels like sort of, I don't know. I mean, it feels like a lot of work. Feels like distracting to me personally. I don't know. We've never really discussed it, just because we're very like focused on like getting the next thing for us, you know. We've done a few things, like we've started in this sort of time of writing, we've started doing a few collabs. Like we had a few beats lying around that we didn't really like figure out how to make work, that we sent off, and we've had some other vocalists do on, we've made a song with a guy who took a beat that that was in the pile of like, this is cool, but we can't figure out how to make it a song, so let's send it to him, and he came up with something really cool, and like that's going to come out under his name, you know. So we've started to do that sort of thing, but not, we've never to come up with an identity that is strong for an artist is like so much work in and of itself, that I sort of feel like personally I'd rather, if people are looking for beats or people are looking for songs and we have some extra ones kicking around, we'd rather send them off to them as opposed to like coming up with a whole other alias.
Yeah.
It's just how I feel.
One thing I'll add to that is like we were very conscious in the very beginning to sort of cast a wide net for Bob Moses, because we realized that like we could do so much, so that even on our first EPs we had like an acoustic song, because we know we didn't want to get pigeonholed as just like if we wanted to release something that's a bit more ethereal or a bit more this, we wanted to be able to have the freedom to do that, because we grew up loving bands like Radiohead that like make everything from grunge tracks to stuff on Kid A. And so we wanted to provide ourselves the same freedom. And I think we realized that there's something special in like the Tom and Jimmy filter. As like, if I like a song and Tom likes a song, then that should just be Bob Moses. You know what I mean? And usually that we trust that compass. And so far it's served us well. And so I think like trying to stray from that, and also what we write is what we write. And I think there's something kind of cool about being like, this is who we are, this is what we do, and we both like this, and so then therefore it's Bob Moses,
Definitely. I think because you've cast that net wide, you're kind of, you won't be in that situation where you won't alienate fans because you've gone in a different direction or something like that, and you can keep evolving that kind of recipe that you guys have. How do you challenge each other both as musicians?
Good question. I think
Tom's a much better musician than me, so that I have become a better musician because I've had to like keep up with Tom. He's like, he grew up like, he's such a good guitar player and he's a great piano player, and like I very much from early on like I'm good at a lot of things, master of none. I was like, okay, I'll figure out how to play music, and then I concentrated more on production at one point, and my musical skills definitely took a back seat. But when Tom and I started working together and playing live, he had come from like doing the club circuits and like playing shows, like, tons of shows, and was like, and so I really had to get my chops up, and Tom really helped with that and pushed me. And so he's really, and still to this day, like I'm not an amazing musician in terms of like, I'm not the greatest piano player. I do it because it's a necessity, but Tom really, pushes me to get better, and without his guidance, I definitely wouldn't be as good as I am now.
Oh, that's nice, dude. I think it's, from my perspective, how do we challenge each other as musicians? I mean, I think it's just like we're both, I guess Jimmy approached that question more from like the like playing musical instruments thing, but I see being a musician is sort of a more rounded thing. And I think that being a musician can encompass like being a producer, and it's more like being a creative person in music. So I think like Jimmy's challenged me a lot. Like Jimmy just has a different approach than me, you know, like everybody's got their own voice, and like Jimmy will come up with shit like that I would never even think of. And it's like, that is what, like there's no way that I could ever write a piano line exactly the way Jimmy does, because he's got like his own approach, and like that just alone challenges me. And so I think like that's the thing that's exciting about our collaboration, is that I find personally Jimmy's musical outlook very exciting, and it especially from a writing perspective, like or a I feel like if I have, say that I have 4 chords or like a sound I'm playing with or something, just Jimmy's like take of that makes like opens like 5 doors for me about like where it could go, you know. And without his take of it, like literally he could play the same part on a piano that I had just played, or vice, or on a guitar or something, and just him hearing the way he does it makes me see something about it that I hadn't seen before. So I think that's the way that's kind of like the main way that we challenge each other as musicians. I think like that's we're lucky that the way that we see and hear stuff just sort of like complements the other really well, and like, and it allows us to see and hear the music in a new way that actually helps us contribute more to it, you know. That's how I feel about it anyways.
I think also there's, you know, the fact that like touring when you're doing it by yourself can be incredibly isolating, and you can lose that motivation. But when somebody's there and you know you've got to do it together, and one of you's got, you know, it kind of keeps you both on your toes maybe a little bit more than if you're doing it completely in isolation.
Totally.
And yeah, and I think that as musicians, I think we can be really guilty of spending hours analyzing our own sound. Do you find that like reaching that final point of satisfaction and acceptance that a piece of work is done, has that become faster for you now, or are you guys still kind of like analyzing that quite a lot?
Making music never gets easier, you know. That's the thing. It's like every time you finish, even if you have your greatest success and you go on to write the next thing, it's always like, okay, what are we going to do now, you know? It's always, I think, sort of to our credit, like finishing, we've learned that there's something about the initial spark of an idea when you have that initial demo that you shouldn't, and you're feeling excited about it, that you shouldn't get in the way of that. There's something special about it, you know. Some people I think have a tendency to like overproduce or overthink. It can always be better. Luckily, because we have each other to bounce things off of, we're very good at sort of controlling the need to go too crazy. You know, we recognize that the gem of the idea is good, and that like, okay, a mixing engineer will make it sound a little bit better, but like, let's just focus on the vibe and the song, you know? We've really realized that our strength is in creating a vibe and having a song married to that vibe, and sort of diluting that as to like the core essence of what that is. And so I think we've gotten better over time at self-editing, but you know, generating new ideas and finishing them is still super hard. You know, you basically just, all that you have is the confidence from the past that like you've done it once, you can do it again. But other than that, it doesn't really get much easier.
Yeah, you never really know. It's like, it doesn't feel, there's like a little bit of like, oh, we've done this before, so we should trust ourselves. But there's still, coupled with that is like, I trust myself, but I also have absolutely no idea. You know, it really doesn't get any easier at all. So
It
but
can be a
that's what it's about though. That's the creative, like that is the journey, like that is the act of creating, you know, like
It's the
least for us.
closest to real magic, you know, like no one know, like you just put the antenna up and you hope, and you have no idea when an idea comes and how it happens. It's like, I think that's why, you know, the respect musicians have for other musicians, or that people have for them in general. It's this insane art form that really has no rhyme or reason. Like, you can learn the production, you can learn how to play piano and guitar and drums, and you can learn all that, but idea generation, that's, no one can explain that, you know? And I think that, like, anytime I'm a huge music history buff. I love reading books about, you know, my favorite artists, or watching documentaries, and because you just want to somehow, like, what have they tapped into? What's the secret? And you never find out. It's like this constant pursuit of the rainbow that you'll never get to, you know. But sometimes lightning strikes and you're lucky enough just to put it in a bottle, you know. But you never know why.
It's so true. And I think there's also just that, like, it's like a wormhole, you know. I mean, there's always just one more plugin, one more layer of sound, and it's really hard to kind of draw that line and just leave it and let it go. But definitely thank you for sharing that with me. So following on from that, Tom, I know that you once said we write about life as a process of understanding it. So with that in mind, does the process of writing unreleased songs maybe double up as a form of therapy? And no pun intended, but did last year kind of help you guys fall even more into focus?
That's good. That's a good pun. Yes, it did. I think we were watching an interview. Jimmy showed me this interview he was watching with Sting a while ago, where he said something to the effect of, like, the process of songwriting is like figuring out, trying to make sense of the world around you that you encounter. And the hope is that if you can do that well, that other people, you're doing it for other people as well. And sort of like, I think one of the things that we've really realized from touring so much is that people are really not that dissimilar at all, especially on a very core level. Like, everybody kind of wants the same sort of things, and the social dynamic is pretty similar, and people are going through a lot of the same struggles, and it's sort of like, and so I think if you just honestly write your own experience, and try and get as good at that as possible, then you're sort of also writing somebody else's experience, and you just have to hope that that lines up. And so yeah, I think that we've had the nice thing about this last year, while there's been many challenges and it's been really hard for people, has been that we've, I don't think we would have ever taken this much time to really just focus on music writing and making, and that's afforded us a sort of introspection that we may not have otherwise had if we had sort of distractions from the outside world, so to speak. So I think it's helped us get really focused, and we've been working really hard, and are quite excited with what we're producing. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers the question.
Very excited to hear what's going to be released soon. But yeah, being human is a universal experience, and there's a lot of similarities. And your music obviously has a lot of raw emotions encapsulated in it that speaks to a lot of people. When you guys perform them, does it kind of bring you back to the feeling of the core of what that song was written about, or are you in a completely different zone when you're performing these kinds of songs?
I think it's what you write music to connect with people, and there's nothing more immediate in that connection than playing a live gig, so it's to write a song. Once you write a song, it sort of takes on a life of its own. It's not yours anymore. It becomes the people, your audience sort of takes it and makes it theirs. And so I think, and we've also been very careful not to go into too much explicit detail about what the songs are about to us, because it really is important to us that we don't infringe on other people's interpretations of them, And so I think that when we're playing them live, it's the excitement about having written something that really connects with people, because that's what you initially set out to do. And so that feeling is sort of verified and gratified, and it really scratches an itch. And it's one of the most if not the most amazing feeling that I have in my life, is being able to do that. And so I think, yeah, it's you do go back to sometimes, like you try to go on autopilot and not think too much while you're playing. But sometimes when we are playing into a massive crowd of people and they're reacting to a song, I do think about, like, man, can't believe we were back in this little studio in Brooklyn when we came up with this, and now there's all these people singing along and dancing to it. It's pretty crazy.
Wow, that
Yeah,
must be. Yeah.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is I think that there's a balance between, like, the feeling of playing is so immediate and you're so like on, you're so like, it's hard to be somewhere else. It's hard to be anywhere else. But I think that the best shows are the ones where you are 100% there in the moment, reacting to that energy that Jimmy just talked about, but you're also channeling, like, especially for when I'm singing them, the songs, channeling the feeling, but that's almost subconscious. Like, I'm not thinking like, oh, this song is about this, so I'm gonna like think about that now. It's just like you just have to try and sing the song and be and embody the emotion of the song, which is sort of just what performing the songs is anyways, like that's what playing. I feel like when we play the song, we're just like, when we're in it, the process of being there, playing the song and being so in the moment is coupled with the process of conveying that emotion, because the music brings it out of us, like like that music came out of us, and that, so when it comes out of us again, it just has an element of the same emotions that came out of it the first time and got put into a record,
Super interesting. So, like, in this time, obviously, like, the world has obviously gone through an incredibly tough year, in music industry in particular has just become, unbelievable what's happened to our industry. Has your music gotten even deeper in this time, and is it easier to write melancholic music in a happier time or a sadder time?
Good question.
I think the thing is that, like what, like Tom was talking about earlier, it's so much about you sort of have to let the subconscious take over when you're writing songs. I think especially lyrics, and especially sometimes we'll just go up and sort of like sing into a mic to come up with ideas. And if we're lucky enough, we'll get a few lines from that process. So I think, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've been writing now is definitely tapped into, I think, a lot of feelings of missing connection with people and things like that. But like also, like, we felt quite, a lot of the feelings feel quite universal, like I feel like we felt very sort of connected to the people around us because everyone's sort of going through a similar thing. You know what I mean? And I think it's like, it's sometimes it's like, as a musician, like you sort of like, I feel alone and isolated, and I wonder if there's anyone else that feels like me out there, and a way into connecting to that. But then there's also something extremely powerful about writing about hardships that everyone's sort of experiencing, and I think it's sort of a balance. There's tinges of nostalgia in it. It's sort of like, music writing for us, like I was saying earlier, is very cathartic. So and we like to write about what we know, so we'll always do that. You know what I mean? And I think it doesn't get easier, and it's not harder, but it's just nice being able to have the time to write, and not being distracted by other things. I think that's probably the most beneficial thing. We can really sort of, it's like a muscle. It's like going to the gym or something like that. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the quicker you have solutions, and the more that you can sort of expand your knowledge about what you're writing about and the tools that you have access to. So I think it just gives you time to think and kind of come up with the sort of best thing that you can, and sort of distill it down to what the essence of whatever you're trying to say is,
Yeah, and I all I would add to that is I think that, like, in this time we're writing about what we know, and we're writing about what's coming up for us. Like, essentially we're all watching the events of the outside world happen, but we don't have this ability. We don't have any ability to, for us at least, the feeling of not having any ability to do anything about it because we're all in isolation is really, that dichotomy is really, like, challenging. And we're all, but coupled with that, there's also this longing to to like connect, and there's this longing to like have a good time, and there's this longing to party, and there's this longing to celebrate. So like a lot of the music that we're coming up with sort of has elements of that, the melancholy, but also like this positivity and this desire, like this party sort of like celebratory feeling. So we feel really proud of what we're coming up with, and also I think that it really encapsulates those two ideas and that struggle between those two things really, really well. Anyways, we'll see once it comes out, everybody can see if they agree or not.
Yeah, well, there's going to be a lot of pent up demand, that's for sure. I don't know if it's already happened yet, but it's been advertised that you guys are doing Circle in a couple of days. Has it been filmed yet, or is it?
Nope.
Is it? Okay, fine.
We're doing it. It's going live to Facebook Live, and so we're doing it live on Monday.
We're doing it live.
Yeah.
That's awesome, because I was going to ask, obviously, that's really cinematic, and you're falling into focus. The whole filming process behind that was incredible. So is there like any similarities with what's happening at Circle, or
We don't know much, to be honest. We don't like, we know the location, we know what time we have to show up, but they're very much pros at doing what they do. So we're preparing the music, and we're practicing, you know, we made a new set, and we're just preparing the music as best as we can and the performance of it and then there's still a lot to be, we don't really know, like, you know, how we're setting up or what the stage is looking like or anything. So we're just going to kind of show up and put ourselves in their capable hands and just do the best musical stuff we can. And hopefully, you know, we trust that they're pros, so we think it's going to be a good result, or hopefully, fingers crossed.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be nothing short of epic. So I'd also like to ask you guys, what do you think of the recent interest towards NFTs? Do you think this is the much needed revolution and transparency for fairer payments in the music industry that will actually materialize? And do you guys have any plans to think about incorporating them in your work maybe someday?
I think it's always great when the status quo gets shaken up, you know, regardless of what that is. And I think 20 years ago, you know, we had Napster come along with free and all sort of digital assets basically were worth nothing, you know, and now you have people paying exorbitant amounts of money to own digital assets. So I think that like there's always been a lag with technology and finding either compensation or finding ways to regulate it. And every time you think you have it under control, something new comes along and shakes the boat up again. And I think this time is the first time it's sort of given the power to the people, which is the most exciting thing. It's given the power to the artists and the people that create the content to sort of like find distribution channels and release it. And so I think in that sense, it's extremely exciting. And I think, you know, we were discussing this the other day. This business is so complicated. There's so many facets to like when you release music, where it goes and how people collect from it. And like, you know, you have to get different statements from YouTube and from Spotify and from Apple, and then from the sales of the records, and like everything is just, it's not centralized, and there's room for human error. And then every once in a while, someone has to go collect this. There's so much mess, you know, and it's a lot of it was designed to intentionally be complicated so that like the average musician couldn't understand it, you know. So I think seeing like here's where the buck stops. This is like you can write all the copyright data into the files. I think it's amazing, you know, and I think it's gonna have labels hopefully adjust some of their policies. It's gonna make things more transparent, like you said, which will then benefit sort of everyone in the long run. Maybe not the people who are, you know, unfairly capitalizing on things, but you know, it'll benefit the people that deserve or you know have written the material, which I think is great. And then as far as us coming up with something, there's nothing concrete yet. I mean, of course, you know, you always want to, especially I think artists that make electronic music that have used technology to their advantage, you always, you know, want to embrace technology because it's done you well thus far, you know. So we don't have anything concrete, but we would love to get involved somehow if we can.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add to that, Tom?
Not really. I think we've always been excited about blockchain, you know, and which is what it's based on. And I think that the the transparency and the accuracy that that can provide would only benefit creative people. And I think that we hope that that gets adopted as much as possible. And I think that the recent NFT boom is a step towards that becoming reality. So that's exciting. We don't totally understand that what's happening right now sort of seems like a little bit like a bubble, but we don't really understand the craziness that's, you know, happening. But we've been excited about blockchain for years, and this is a major step towards adoption of that technology into art and music. So from that perspective, we're very stoked.
Definitely, definitely. It'd be very interesting to see where it goes.
Hey you, we hope you're enjoying today's episode. We're on a serious mission here to create one of the world's best podcast series, and we'd be so grateful if you could support us in any way by becoming a patron of the show. There's a tier to suit every level, from early bird tiers where you get downloads to all my music with some super cool ninja stickers, to our VIP Mission Maker tiers where you get epic rewards like exclusive footage that never gets aired, the chance to submit questions to our guests with signed copies of books from them, DJ lessons, one-to-one coaching, and a whole load of super cool Ninja and Mission Maker merchandise. You can start supporting us for less than what it costs you to fill up your car for a month by simply heading over to www.patreon.com/missionmakers. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
What do you think is the biggest misconception of dance music, and how do you think the scene will redefine itself in this time?
Wow, good question.
Biggest misconception of dance music.
You got anything on that one, Jimmy?
This was more of an issue 10 years ago, but I think it's like that now that festival culture has made its way to America and being a DJ is a very viable thing. I think before other music, it used to not get taken very seriously as like a viable art form, you know? And I think people sort of over the course of the last 10 years, at least throughout our career, there's been a sea change there and it shifted, you know? And I think people really have understood the sort of what the art of DJing is, the art of making records. I think a lot of younger people who are getting into producing music now, I think a lot of them are either using laptops to make whatever kind of music they're making, so that it's just become, it is sort of essentially the new punk rock. It's the lowest entry point price wise. You can buy a laptop. If you have good ideas, dance music is a very easy entry level thing to get into that you can make by yourself and learn how to do something and make something that you're proud of, and then other people can take it and play it. So it's like this, you know, it's a great thing if you're starting out and you really don't have much going on. You can be in a small town from somewhere, make some beats, a big DJ can play it, and all of a sudden you have a career, you know? And I think that's super exciting to people. So I think the misconception used to be that you didn't have to be that talented, or that, you know, you could just phone it in on a computer. But I think time has sort of proven that wrong. And other than that, I don't, you know, I
Yeah,
think
it's hard to think of what other. Oop, am I frozen or are you frozen?
it was just you for a sec.
Oh, okay. It's hard to think of what other misconceptions there are about dance music, because that felt like the big one, that like a DJ, the producers of the music weren't artists, you know. But yeah, I can't.
Fair. We'll take Jimmy's answer on that one. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys know this, but here in the UK, just to add to that, DJing and music production is now on the GCSE music syllabus, which is like our almost equivalent of like IB, or you know, basically from 16 to 18. So like the ways, so like the ways that people are, you know, especially the younger generations, are learning about music. As you said, the barriers to entry obviously is super low. Can download an app on your phone or whatever, and make something, you know, that you can export into a WAV or something. So yeah, it's very interesting. But I think that, alluding back to when dance music exploded in America, I think, you know, there probably were a lot of misconceptions of what it took to get to that level of success. But obviously what you see isn't really the true story of how long it takes somebody to break through, and all the work that goes into it. Going back into those kind of earlier days, Jimmy, I know that you were more of a trance DJ when you started out. What do you think is missing from trance these days? Do you still listen to trance?
We were just having this conversation yesterday, actually, that like sort of trance has found its way back into dance music. Like, I think there's it's just slower. Like a lot of the melodies, like, like our friends Rufus to Soul, some of the riffs that they have, those could be trance riffs. Some of the stuff that we've written, like in our song, The Blame, there's some like, I think there's a lot of people that that are from our generation that were younger, they were listening to trance, that are taking those influences and finding ways to incorporate them. Do I still listen to trance? Yes, I have a great trance vinyl collection that I'll tap into.
Nice.
And I have a playlist that I've made of like the classics on Spotify that I used to listen to, and like, because there's trends, right? And some of those sounds, like I think especially sort of in the lo-fi house thing, like I know guys like DJ Boring, DJ Seinfeld, Ross from Friends, Peggy Goo. I've seen videos of them playing classic trance tracks in their sets, and I think it's just funny how things come around full circle. So trance is, and also even especially we talk about this, like what Tale of Us has done. There's a lot of trancey sounds in dance music. It doesn't sound like the same like Paul Van Dyke circa 2002. It doesn't sound like that, but it's taken on a new sort of life.
Very interesting. I love listening to trance, even still to this day. Maybe not the stuff that's coming out today, but more like, like more 10, 15 years ago. But when I'm skiing, I find it incredible to just like challenge you to go harder on the slopes. So Jimmy, also I wanted to ask you that back in the day, also you worked for Lee Burridge and Matthew DK's All Day I Dream, and also Get Physical at a very young age. And I'm curious to know, what do you think's harder? Do you think it's harder to get that position in the first place? Or do you think it's harder to maintain that position once you've got it? And what were your kind of key takeaways from that time?
Sure. I just want to clarify that with Matt and Lee, I was never officially a part of All Day I Dream. Before they started it, I was sort of helping Matt engineer records with, it was basically like me going to university. Matt took me under his wing. I was there sort of when he met Lee, and I was just in the studio trying to learn as much as I can. And I was basically I was too embarrassed I didn't feel confident about putting my name on records. And so I thought and I felt like I needed to sort of cut my teeth and learn. And I was very fortunate enough to have met Matt, who took me under his wing and taught me so much about production. And then through Lee Bridge, I learned about sort of DJing, and like I would go watch his sets, and he snuck me into a nightclub when I was, 19 or 20, and I would watch his sets, and I was just a fan, And through Lee, I met Philip from Mandy, and I started, producing records for them. And so this is just sort of like an education in dance music. I feel super lucky to have met them. And when Tom and I started working, I was, we would work on Bob Moses stuff, and then I would work with the guys from Mandy and Get Physical sometimes, and like that, I learned so much, about all that. It was just so instrumental to like who I am today and the kind of music that I make, or like when I'm thinking about making a 16-bar loop, what sort of required, like okay, it ticks this box, it ticks that box. I'm forever grateful for those guys being sort of a part of my story, and it's been amazing to have that.
Very cool. Do you think it's harder to be in that position and to get the chance to work with such people, or even just be around them, or do you think it's harder to maintain it once you've kind of gotten there?
I think it's harder once there's getting in the door and then staying in the door. I think it's both are hard for different reasons, because one comes from a certain sense of I have to prove myself and no one knows who I am, and the other one is like I feel confident in my abilities, and now I just have to keep going. So they're both equally hard, and I'd say the only reason that the first step might be easier is that it only happens once. Once you get in the door, that's it, you're in the door. But staying, you have to constantly keep reinventing yourself or keep doing it. When we initially had success as Bob Moses, it's like, okay, you become an established act, but then continuing and releasing music that people cares about it, like that challenge never ends, So I'd say I've only thought about this now, but I'd say it's probably hard. The second half of that's probably harder, the sustained section of it,
It's very true. It's very true. And like, what do you guys have had some really interesting artists do remixes for you? And what are like, what do you guys kind of look for when you approach a remixer?
Just if we're fans of them, really. And like, I mean, I think that if we're fans of them, and then first, and then second, um, well, there's been a couple remixes of people that we actually weren't so much fans of first, but just kind of like happened and it worked. And if the song is, depending on what the song is and what the sort of goal for the remix package is, that comes into consideration. And then also what the person's production style is and what the vibe of the tune is. So for example, we might choose remixer A and B for this song, but we wouldn't necessarily choose those two remixes for a different song. So it's kind of like there's a creative aspect, and then there's also, you know, we're lucky that we get to usually choose people that we're fans of, and then there's also sometimes there's a bit of the consideration of like, okay, this person would be really good because, you know, for this, we want to achieve this with this remix and they're really good at that. Yeah.
Fair play, fair play. Tom, I wanted to ask you a question. So we know that you became a dad in the lockdown. How has that kind of changed you? And also, how's that kind of played a role into bringing what's important into focus for you?
Well, that I would say that it's the main thing about it is that it's very focusing. There's way less, and my friends who had kids before would tell me this, but you don't get it until you go through it. But it's like very, you know, the amount of time you have is significantly reduced, or free time, you know, so you don't have like time to dilly dally. So it's very focusing in that respect. And it's been great otherwise. I mean, it's awesome. It's weird because I had built it into this thing in my head beforehand, but it's very natural, where we're made to do it, you know, and you realize that it's very much a lot of the things that I think people or myself worry might be difficult, you don't even actually think about. It's just kind of like it's the same as digesting food or something. I know that's kind of a weird analogy, but it's like you have the basic requirements built into you the same way that you have the basic requirements of like digesting food built into you, and you don't have to think about it. And it's sort of like a lot more just natural impulse that you just kind of operate on. But yeah, and having the time, you know, home is kind of a blessing in disguise. I never would have gotten as much time to be around for the beginning of the new life, you know. So it's been cool. I mean, it's been this whole time of COVID isolation has been challenging in many ways, but also we've been fortunate in a few different ways to have silver linings to really, and we've done a very good job of zeroing in on the things that are positive, that we can focus on and use to our advantage, use all this time to our advantage, you know, and that's outweighed for us, luckily, the negative sides of, you know, of isolation. So it's been the extension of the family has been a very worthwhile and helpful endeavor in keeping me sane and giving me something to focus on with the lack of, you know, outside world stimulation that I'm used to. Because we went from going pretty full on, you know, doing tons and tons of shows and traveling and studio sessions and always working, to not being able to go anywhere. So it's been a good distraction.
Definitely. I know that during this lockdown, you guys interviewed Charlotte DeWitt on your Bobcast, and I'm curious, as two individuals who obviously did spend a lot of time touring, and as a result naturally had to answer a lot of interview questions, what was it like being on the other side of the microphone And has that experience given you a different appreciation about the art of interviewing?
I think, Tom and I have always naturally loved podcasts and watched a lot of them. And, it is hard to interview people because, and I have to say, I mean, you've done a fantastic job. I think part of it's just finding out the idiosyncrasies which make people who they are, and tapping into that and what makes people unique. And I think for us, it was really interesting talking to Charlotte or other artists because, like yourself, like we're all artists and musicians. And so you have you sort of know things to ask that every musician will have like a unique take on, and so I think it was, musicians, like we all relatively do the same thing, but there are big differences, like being a techno DJ and doing what we do are two different things. It's like, sure, we play festivals, sure, we all do this, we get on planes, but we have two different experiences. So I think sort of like seeing where those experiences differ, seeing where the inspirations are, and like, we both love techno, we both love what Charlotte does, and we're super grateful that she did a remix for us. And sort of figuring out like, how did she get to where she's at, and how that different sort of from our story, and like, connecting on those levels. I think that's like, why musicians really bond. It's like you sort of take a risk and you do a thing that is quite unconventional and maybe a bit of a, like a risky career path, and then you sort of celebrate together. Like, how did you get here? What did you do, and how crazy was your ride? And it's just fun to talk about,
Definitely. Did you guys like have questions before, or was it just supernatural, like just go with the flow?
We had a couple guidelines, not, you've obviously prepared greatly, and it gave us a big thing for us also is that it gave us a further appreciation for good interviewers versus people who don't really put in the time. And it's like, because we did have to think a little bit about, okay, well, what are we going to do and what are we going to ask and stuff. But we did a little bit of prep, but then we just kind of, we also know her too, so it wasn't like we'd never met her before, so
Yeah.
it was a bit easier. But yeah, the art of interviewing is definitely more complex than I think most of us think about, and so good interviewers like yourself are few and far between. So
thank you very much. You're making me blush. No, but it is different when you don't know someone. It is obviously much harder to get that that chemistry, that rapport, and yeah, being prepared is obviously. But it kind of helps because I've been, massive fans of you guys for just so long. So like, it's a pleasure to be able to even have this conversation with you guys. Something that I wanted to ask just before we go into the next section is that success is like an iceberg, and people really only see the tip unless they know you obviously very well. What have people not seen underneath the perception of Bob Moses, and what's one thing that you struggled with the most as artists, and that's then helped you sort of navigate that challenge?
oh, good question.
I think that iceberg thing is so true. I remember seeing a thing where I believe it was a graphic designer who turned around a piece of work very quickly for a client, and said, this is what I'm charging, and the person went, what? But that only took a day. I'm not going to pay that. He's like, no, it took me the 25 years of my life to get to the point where I could do it in a day,
Yeah.
And I very much believe that that's like every hour that Tom spent alone in his room when he was a kid playing guitar, like that, all of those experiences, all the records that you listen to, that all makes you who you are as a musician, And I think the tip of the iceberg is us being Bob Moses that release records and play shows and have a great time. But the bottom of it is two guys who like have put in a lot of work, have had a dream to do this their whole life, have spent countless hours practicing, countless hours pondering over what a good song is and pushing themselves. And we've had it's really hard work, but we have a tremendous amount of fun. And like you said, I can't imagine doing it alone, and I'm really lucky to have Tom doing it. So I think it's just the thing that people don't see is just the it's not, you hear about overnight successes. There are no such things as overnight successes. Maybe one thing you do become successful overnight, but it takes a lot of work to get there. And one of the greatest sort of pieces of advice we've ever heard is a guy said, I worked really hard to get lucky, and I really feel like that's true.
Totally.
Very true. Very true. Anything to echo that, or just do you agree with everything he said?
Very well said.
Yeah, I think he said it very well, and it's true. I saw that picture as well, and you know, it's very true. What can take somebody an hour, 2 hours comes from thousands and thousands of hours of being immersed, observing, experimenting, all of those things. So we've had a few questions come in from our audience. This one is from Sean in Detroit, and he asks, "What is the first song that you guys would play in a DJ set? The first time that you can get back on the ones and twos again in a live format?"
Wow,
That's hard.
that feels like it's so funny that like in COVID times, you very much live in the moment and thinking about playing on decks live in front of an audience. This feels like this. Oh, that's like never gonna happen, you know, even though it is.
I don't know what we would play first. That's
Yeah.
like that's like we've prepared for this circle thing, and like the next thing we're gonna have to do is kind of like think about what the next iteration of our club set will be, and the big part of that will be figuring out how we're going to start it.
It will
I
be,
can tell you, I would like it to be like a Prince song or something. That's not going to happen. I'd just love to get on the decks and just start playing like old classic 80s jams and celebrate and have a good time, you know? But it's probably going to have to be a Bob Moses song, because I don't think anyone would show up to watch us just play Prince for 2 hours.
No, it doesn't have to be a Bob Moses song. Okay, well, we'll just have to kind of be at that first gig then to hear that live.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, so the next question is from Neve in Ireland, and she says, "Is it rare now that you write music that doesn't get released, and what are some of your favorite go-to plugins?"
Double part question. Yes, no, it's not rare. I'd say that for every song like that gets released, we've written, I don't know, 10 that never see the light of day. I mean, like this album so far, we have maybe like 6 or 7 songs that are like we're pretty sure we're going to make the cut, and we've maybe started 40 ideas that we've taken through some part of like quite far that we've played for each other, and then maybe we have like 10 to 15 ideas that we sort of came up with in the same time that we haven't played for each other because they're not really good enough, or you know what I mean, like, so the amount of work that it takes to get one release song is huge, like in term as far as we're concerned. Like we do tons of, we come up with a lot of ideas and not many make the cut. So that's always been that way, and I'd actually say that it's going further the other way. I think that like we come up with more and we're harder on ourselves now than we used to be.
Fair play, fair play.
And then plugins, I mean, we use Valhalla reverbs a lot. We use the Waves plugins a lot. Sound Toys plugins. You want to throw any more in there, Jimmy?
Yeah, like a lot of our plugins that we use, like Tom said, are more sort of like to manipulate like their delays and reverbs and compressors and stuff like that. And a lot of the stuff that we use for our sounds are like, you know, we have this Korg Minilog synth. A lot of it ends up, or guitars and stuff. A lot of it ends up being sort of more analog. And then for drums and stuff, just samples. So those plugins are all like, are what sort of we've used to try and make it sound good once we find riffs and parts that we like.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, cool. So the next part is our quick fire round. We've got about 60 seconds for each question. Maybe a bit more since there's 2 of you. But okay, cool. We'll start with the first one. So what is the best place to get a pizza in New York?
I'm gonna have to go with Lucali's.
Yeah.
But you're gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to wait like 2 hours.
It's funny, we were just talking about this. We had pizza yesterday here, actually. There's a whole backstory to that, but we don't have time to say it in 60 seconds. So Lucali's or Roberta's is good too. I haven't had Lucali's. I've had Roberta's though. But I've want to go to Lucali's. Jimmy's had Lucali's, so.
The great thing about New York, you can just walk on the street. Most pizza's pretty good, you know?
Yeah.
But Lucali's is pretty exceptional.
Okay, fair enough. Are you guys fans of Formula One? Do you support any of the Canadian drivers?
I was when I was younger. I used to love like Kimi Räikkönen and like Schumacher when he was there. And then I know we have a Canadian driver now, which I should be way more on board on, but like I haven't been following it lately.
Okay, fair. How about you?
I know nothing about it, no, other than people go really fast and it's really cool. But I've just generally I used to play sports, but I have a really bad memory for stats and dates and like and times and so the whole following sports thing I've never really, even sports I used to play a lot in high school and stuff, I never followed the teams or followed or knew when the season was, or I'm a bit like off with the fairies with that stuff. So so that translates to Formula One too.
Okay, fair.
That's a
We're just gonna
trend.
have to, yeah, we're just gonna have to take you blind driving when you guys come here.
There you go.
Okay, next one. I know you're a massive gamer, Jimmy, so this might be a bit unfair, but board games or video games?
Video games, 100%.
100%.
Yeah, board games you have to find people to play with. I'm an only child. Video games, wherever you can just do it.
Okay, cool, fair enough. Were you like super stoked when some of your tracks made onto the FIFA soundtrack?
100%.
Was that like a
I
moment?
think as far as like as games go, like that's probably one of the biggest ones, and like it was very unexpected, And yeah, we were thrilled that happened, and it happened twice, and we're very fortunate. It's
That's
awesome.
epic. That's epic. Tom, I know you're an avid reader. Are you reading anything interesting at the moment, or anything from the past that you could recommend to our listeners?
I'm reading Obama's biography at the moment. It's really good, his newest one, and I want to read Bill Gates' book on climate change. That's next on the docket. And I got a bunch of other books I'm gonna read, but yeah, those are the two that are like in my sights. I don't really read fiction, which is weird. I don't. I feel like because I should read more fiction, but I don't really read much fiction.
I find it uses the same part of the brain that like when you write songs, it's like this make believe thing that you're inventing stuff, and I feel like fiction exhausts me. I love it for the words because you expand your vocabulary, but it's and the writing is like it's like fiction is where writers write, but like I find it like quite exhausting, especially after a day of trying to write yourself.
Yeah, to go into another world, it is, yeah. And if you're doing all the video gaming, I think.
So how our relationship works is I fill Tom in on the latest video games, which he doesn't care about, and then I get to learn about climate change. It's a very one-sided, intellectual relationship.
Jimmy just gave me a book. Jimmy just gave me a book recently, actually, and in the front he wrote, "I think this book is worth about 50 articles, so I'm good for a while," which is true.
Nice. What's your favorite thing to do when you guys come to London?
I love going to Marouche and eating Lebanese food.
Yeah, I would say that's up there.
My first experience, we've been to Lebanon a few times, but and the food there is absolutely fantastic. But prior to that, I had never had Lebanese food prior to going to Marouche in London, and it's crazy when and now that's like one of my favorite cuisines.
Yeah, well, I love that too. I mean, eating good food. I like walking, just going for walks and like driving around, checking it out. I mean, to be honest, we're usually there to play a show, so that's probably my favorite thing to do when I go to London.
Fair play. Well, there's a place that might even top Marouche. Actually, it does top Marouche. It's a hole in the wall type of place, but there's always the best places to get to get the kebab. So I'll have to tell you guys that next time you're down here. Last two questions. What are you both most grateful for this month?
Oh,
I'm most grateful for good health and my friends and family, like being healthy and happy. Like that's what I just celebrated a birthday yesterday, actually, and that was
True. Yeah.
That was what I really was. It was my first birthday celebrating as a dad too, which was interesting, which is cool to just like put all that in perspective. And really what it comes down to is so long as you are like, you know, healthy and generally positive, and you have good friends and family around you, like that's, you can kind of cope with everything else, you know. So that's what I was the most grateful for.
Yeah, I don't
Definitely.
have much to add to that, because like I think especially during now with COVID, like we've had a few friends or acquaintances that have been hit hard by, you know, either getting COVID or and sickness. And like I think especially now, just like when you're healthy, I feel like you take it for granted, especially when you're younger. And you know, and I feel like now, like sort of getting older and having like life more in perspective and things like that, you start to value actually your health more, because you realize it's quite a fragile thing, you know, and you're lucky to have it if you do.
Yeah, and also like
Definitely.
if you even if you have a cold, like you can't do all the fun shit that life has to offer, you know? So
Yeah.
it's like as soon as I get a little cold, I'm like, oh, being, I take this for granted. I don't even think about it, but being just feeling good, waking up feeling good is such a dope thing to have, because you can do all the other fun shit. It's
Being
like
able
the
to breathe through
prerequisite.
both nostrils, that's my thing. When you're like lying down in bed and you can't breathe, and like you're like 5 days in, you never remembered a time when you could breathe through both of you. Like, you know, you're just like this.
Definitely, definitely. And like what I was going to say about that. Oh yeah, being a musician is not the healthiest of career choices, just from all the back pain and all that stuff that ensues. So definitely, I agree. Health
You
is,
gotta work at keeping that one healthy. Yeah,
yeah.
we've been through the ringer on that one, so we've learned that we've the 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 school of hard knocks on the health front. Being a musician is the best way to learn.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. Okay, and lastly, I can't let you go without asking you a question about Robert Moses. Do you guys have any favorite projects by him when you spent a lot of time in New York? Was there anything that like really inspired you from what he did?
I mean, to be honest, when we were initially named Bob Moses, we had no idea who he was. And so for a while, we were sort of like changing our sort of story about like it was a civil rights activist, it was a drummer, it was Robert Moses, the architect. We used to say that like it was a person that invented the hairstyles in the 80s. And
Yeah, we
so
used to say he was a gym teacher at our
said it was our
school.
gym teacher. And so there was a point where like we started to realize that aesthetically we really liked this idea of like New York City architecture, and that he was somehow involved in city planning. And so we sort of adopted that a bit more. But I think we used to bring up these sort of old diagrams, like when we were initially, before we had any artwork, we used to have like these black and white photos of like, or like, you know, sketches of his like the arteries of like the highways that he would make in New York. And it was just like cool imagery. And one of the things that like ended up tying it together is the BQE, which is the highway that in Brooklyn was how we got from our apartment to our studio, and he was responsible for that. So I think that it's probably one of the most unsightly things, and people in New York would hate this, but because it was so like instrumental to our career and he was involved in building it, I'd have to say the BQE probably, even though like he's done Shea Stadium, all these amazing things, but that actually was the thing that impacted us the most. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to get to work and write music.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Fair play.
I agree. I don't have anything to add to that. I think like, yeah, we, like Jimmy said, we kind of like, we, part of what we liked about the name Bob Moses at the beginning was that it was sort of like everybody knows the name Moses. Bob is like the everyman, and we were two dudes with one band name, and we just thought, and then it had all the he was, the name was used throughout, like Jimmy said, the architect, not only the architect but the civil rights activist, the drummer, like, and then we came up with a few other stories, and it was sort of like, you know, it was like many, throughout many parts of life, and we kind of liked that.
And we've
So
stolen bits and pieces sort of from all of them and adopted them in weird ways, depending on like sort of what's fit the narrative that we're trying to go with, you know. So it's a name that like is ever evolving, and sort of the idea of two guys being called one name is always like this, the mystery that's sort of behind that, like Alice Cooper or Billy Talent or Jethro Tull. We've kind of always liked that.
yeah,
Mm. Well, you guys, took another involvement today when you learned about the Bright fame and the meaning behind some of these names as well.
Exactly.
So I'm very happy to have imparted some of that with you. Well, thank you guys both so much. We really appreciate you guys giving us your time, and it was so exciting talking with you. And just cannot wait to hear some of the stuff that you guys have been writing in lockdown.
Well, thanks for having us. It's great to chat.
It was just mind-blowing speaking with Jimmy and Tom today. I honestly never thought I'd get the opportunity to interview the band, so a huge thank you to Bob Moses for being our season closer, and to all of our incredible guests over the last 3 months. I hope it's left you super inspired, and from all of us at Mission Makers, we're wishing you an incredible summer. Go out and make those missions happen like there's no tomorrow, because life is just way too short. We'll be bringing you some of our best bits over the summer as well, with some great bonus content, including our top tips on how to start your own podcast, getting into the warrior mindset, and also my experiences of giving a TED Talk. So be sure to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you listen to your podcast if you want to stay in tune with the show. And feel free to reach out to me at Mission Makers or at dj.n1nja on Instagram. And if you're interested in supporting the show and getting some really cool rewards like virtual DJ lessons with me, life coaching, and so much more, don't forget to visit www.patreon.com/Mission Makers. And thank you again for listening and being part of our journey. We will speak to you very, very soon.